And welcome to First Bite Part 2, our Detroit Lions preview podcast. This time we're not previewing Week 14. This time we are previewing, again, the Detroit Lions offseason. Last week we brought you more information on Robert Saleh. This week we're going to talk about the guy who took him down on Monday night. My name is Jeremy Reisman. I am the managing editor at prideofdetroit.com, your co-host for First Bite. With us this week is Chris Perfett, our co-host and adequate host of the PODcast. Chris, how are you doing tonight?
I'm just here to take a break from cyberpunk. Just gotta go back in. Gotta do more cyber. Gotta do more punk.
Fair enough.
But it's football. The things we do. The sacrifices I make for the brands.
You're
here
a
at
hero.
Pride of Detroit.
You are nothing short of a hero. And also a hero to join us and take some time out of his day to talk to us about Brian Daboll is Matthew Fairburn, the beat writer for the Bills over at The Athletic. You can find him at Matthew Fairburn on Twitter. Matthew, how are you doing tonight?
No, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's kick things off with Brian Daboll. Let's really just start with him as a person. We talked a lot about Robert Saleh, and we see a lot of kind of sideline theatrics with him. I don't think we see quite as much with Brian Daboll. So just from your observations, either at practice or during games, what kind of coach is he on a day-to-day basis in terms of just his personality?
Yeah, you definitely don't see quite as much of him because he spends his game day in the booth calling his plays from upstairs, which is an interesting note, I guess, when you're considering a potential future head coach and a guy that will probably want to call his own offensive plays. He has had more success up in the booth. He moved up there at some point, trying to remember the exact time. I think it was at some point last year. It was kind of something he and Josh Allen figured out, what worked best for them. And he likes it up there. It's worked well for them. But as a guy, Brian Daboll he's a good guy to deal with, from my perspective, since I've gotten to know him over the last few years. I think the version of Brian Daboll that the Bills have is a lot different than the one, some of his players might have had earlier in his career. I talked to Derek Anderson a few weeks ago for a story I was doing on Josh Allen. He was the Bills' backup in 2018, but he also spent time with Brian Daboll in Cleveland early in his career. And his thought was that when he got to Buffalo, Brian Daboll was he wasn't as much of a hard ass as he was in Cleveland. He wasn't as, he was much more receptive to feedback in Buffalo and much more willing to bend to his players a little bit on certain things. And I think that's what Brian Daboll would like his defining characteristic as a coach to be, that he's somebody who will fit his scheme to his players and will fit his style to his players and really work to their strengths and take feedback. And there's been a lot of examples of him doing that over the last few years. So as a guy, I think that's what you're getting is he's pretty down to earth in a lot of ways. He's a big time grinder, like, a guy that will, which if you get to this point in coaching, that's probably, something that you've got as a characteristic. He's definitely a hard worker, but a pretty low key guy. He's from here, not too far from the Bills Stadium in West Seneca, New York, and grew up here, still has a lot of family here. So he's definitely appreciative of all that and, what this team means to this community. And I think there's a lot of similarities between Buffalo and Detroit, in terms of the fan base and the characteristics of the community. So I think that would make him a pretty good fit as well.
Yeah, I know when he had jumped around quite a bit early in his career. You kind of alluded to that. There was never really a place he spent as an offensive coordinator more than 1 or 2 seasons. He worked with Eric Mangini in Cleveland. I believe he spent some time with Romeo Crennel, if I'm not mistaken, in 2012. I think that's right. And I think one of the things I know Jeremy wants to talk about is his Patriots ties at some point. But I guess my point is I guess my question is 2 point. One, do you think, a lot of that he has kind of like why he jumped around a lot? I know you talked about in the past, maybe he was a bit of a hard ass or he saw himself as a bit of a hard ass, or if it's just kind of the circumstances of those situations. And I guess the other is, and this always pops out to me, is when a guy kind of moves from the NFL to college, then back to the NFL. He spent 2017 as the co-offensive coordinator in Alabama and the quarterbacks coach. He got to work with some of those exciting young quarterbacks we've kind of seen being touted out of Alabama in recent years, kind of taken over as Lane Kiffin kind of left the door. And, you've seen quite a few guys kind of come through to transform Alabama from this, slug of yesteryear into a high-powered offense. Like, what do you think what would you say he probably learned at Alabama that kind of just he brought back with him to the NFL?
Yeah, I think there's definitely some concepts offensively, the creativity that you see in college sometimes, a little bit of, some different, passing concepts or things like that. I think there's also you're almost forced to connect with players a little bit differently in college, whether it's recruiting or, the youth that you're dealing with, right? The age of the guys, you have to kind of get on their level a little bit and be able to relate to them. And I think that's a little bit different in college than it is in the pros sometimes. There's a little bit more of that. So, and he got to be around Nick Saban. That doesn't hurt. So I think the fact that he's bounced around is, it could be viewed, I guess, as sort of a detriment to him, but also like the places he had pretty rotten hands, right? Like, I mean, being the offensive coordinator of those Chiefs early on and those Browns, not sure too many people would have stuck around. There was a lot of people losing jobs. So it wasn't so much him jumping around as it was him probably taking the wrong jobs. And it's why it took him a while before he eventually got back in that coordinator spot. And it does seem like he reflected and learned a lot from the various stops along the way.
Well, let's dive a little bit into his offensive philosophy. You mentioned that maybe he kind of fits his scheme to his players, and I think we may have seen that already in Buffalo. Last year they were kind of a run-heavy team that was pretty successful doing that. This year they're pretty much throwing the ball all the time, and I want to bring up one quote that I thought was really interesting, and I think something that Lions fans are really going to like. He said a couple of weeks ago, I think he says, "Balance is important if it's working. If one of them is not working, then you better not have too much balance. You better do the other thing more." Is that what you see kind of on a week-to-week basis, or is it more year-to-year depending on the personnel? And I guess if you had to kind of encapsulate his scheme in it's probably not fair to do it in a sentence or two, but if you could kind of put it all in together in one simple paragraph, let's say, how would you describe it?
Yeah, it's definitely one where he will play to his players' strengths. So it's not what he does in Buffalo might not be exactly what he would do in Detroit. Mm-hmm. It's possible. The personnel is not drastically different, but a lot of shotgun with Josh Allen, a lot of pre-snap motion, a lot of play action. He's cutting edge in some of those ways where he will look at what works around the league and incorporate it into what he does here. But he's also very much the type of coach, like I said, he wants the defining characteristic of him as a coach to be that he will mold his scheme around his players. A lot of coaches say that they're not going to try to fit a square peg into a round hole or this or that. But we saw, I think I can tell the difference because a few years earlier, Rex Ryan came here and said the exact same thing and then completely broke the Bills defense by trying to fit all these guys into his 3-4 scheme.
Yeah.
Brian Daboll came in here, talked about that, and then built an offense around the quarterback that they decided to draft, which he was a pretty big part of the scouting process that led them to Josh Allen. And then he's year after year changed things a little bit here and there. Cole Beasley has talked about how there's route concepts that he ran at SMU that he thought might work, and he brought them to Brian Daboll, and the next day they're running them in practice. And a week later they're running them in a game. They figure out ways to incorporate some of those things, and younger Brian Daboll might not have done that. I think this year there's also, a great example of they use 4 wide receiver sets more than any other team in the league. Why do they do that? Because they have 4 good wide receivers.
Right.
It's really that simple. Like sometimes with Brian Daboll, the simplest answer is the easiest one. Like you said, with balance. Why do they throw so much? Because they're better at throwing.
Yeah.
And it's a more efficient way to move the ball.
Right.
But they're also just better at it. And so if a game plan, if a matchup calls for running the ball, they'll do it. They did it against the Patriots because the Patriots are one of the worst run defending teams in the NFL. So they'll do that if they have to. But, if they need to throw the ball 40 times a game, they're no longer afraid to do it because they have a quarterback who can handle it. And, that's the big thing with Brian Daboll. If, he's going to cater to his personnel, and he's involved with the personnel too. He's got a relationship with Brandon Beane and Joe Shane, the assistant general manager. I think he mentions them almost weekly in his news conferences with the media, where he'll give them credit for a certain player or something working. He'll always deflect credit to somebody else, whether it's his player or the people in the front office for getting that player. And he's been involved, like I said, scouting Josh Allen. Robert Foster, you might remember, had a big year for them a few years ago. Brian Daboll had familiarity with him at Alabama and helped bring him to Buffalo when he was an undrafted free agent. So he's the type of guy that will provide his input when it's valuable, when it's needed, but also, is also willing to say, look, I need this type of guy, go find that guy, or work hand in hand and compromise and be a little bit flexible and malleable, which I think is a pretty good quality to have, especially in this day and age.
I know one of the, since you mentioned Josh Allen, I kind of want to focus on his work with Allen here for a second, because I know, looking at people I know from, let's just call them draft Twitter, have never really let Josh Allen go as this idea of someone who is just not developed. But I mean, I remember talking with another guy I work with, Jonas Knox, who said at the beginning of this year, like, look, through camp, Allen has massively progressed in his throwing motion, in his decision making, and he's massively improved developmentally, especially this year. But he has shown progress every year he's been at Buffalo. I guess I would ask you then, how much of that can you attribute to Allen working in Daboll's system, or is it more just kind of Allen kind of naturally progressing?
I think Brian Daboll deserves a lot of credit for what you see with Josh Allen. I hesitate to give him too much credit because Bills fans are a little sensitive, and that would mean I'm not giving Josh Allen enough credit. If you heap praise on Brian Daboll, then that means you're hating on Josh Allen, which I'm not trying to do. But watch some of these games. Go watch some of these games that Josh Allen's thrown for 400 or 4 touchdowns, and check out how open some guys get, and how some of the concepts they run that consistently are being called at the right time and things like that. So there is an element of what you're seeing in 2020. Brian Daboll deserves some credit for that. Josh Allen's hitting those guys. He's got a huge arm. There's some stuff that Brian Daboll can call simply because he has a guy as talented as Josh Allen at quarterback. But you also can't discredit the fact that this is year 3 in the system with Brian Daboll. Brian Daboll was involved from the very beginning of the process. They fired Rick Dennison after Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane's first year in Buffalo in 2017. Rick Dennison was not their first choice, not their second choice, not their third choice of offensive coordinator, but that's who they got stuck with. They fired him knowing they would be drafting a quarterback. And they immediately got Brian Daboll involved in that, starting at the Senior Bowl, meeting with Josh Allen at the Combine. He was on all those workouts, that they did. And basically from the start was there to guide him along, build a system around his strengths and coach him up. They added Ken Dorsey after Josh Allen's rookie year to be the quarterback's coach. He's done a great job as well. Josh Allen does a lot of work on his own with Jordan Palmer in the off season. So there's a lot of this that's Josh being, personally motivated and driven to get better. There's a lot of it that is his natural ability and the natural progression quarterbacks go through in the NFL. But comparing him to the other quarterbacks in that class, he has as much stability as just about any of them at that coordinator spot. And I think that's really valuable. And Brian Daboll works with him very closely. He, for his entire rookie year, it seemed like was basically his quarterback's coach, because they had David Culley as the quarterback's coach then. And he had never coached quarterbacks in the NFL before getting that job. So Brian Daboll did a lot of that work early on, stuck with him, and you can just see the relationship they have, how much they care about each other. And I think that results in a lot of trust, knowing his quarterback well, to be able to call certain things at certain times, knowing what not to call, knowing what won't work, and not trying to make Josh Allen into something he isn't. And I mean, Josh Allen's playing really well this year. He's, a lot of people mention him in MVP conversations and things of that nature. So it's been a group effort, and I think everybody involved would say that, behind closed doors and otherwise.
Yeah, it's interesting. And theoretically speaking, he comes to Detroit. You have to wonder if maybe he goes out and gets his new quarterback, his new project. Obviously, I think he could probably work with Matthew Stafford pretty well, but given that he's 32, I think, that's a big conversation that if they bring in Brian Daboll for an interview, I think that's one thing that they probably are talking about for at least half their interview, you'd imagine. One thing before we go to our first break here, we have to bring up his Patriots past. The Lions just got rid of a Patriots head coach. It's going to be a tough sell to give someone that kind of came from those ranks. He's there 3 different stints, basically for about 8 years. But you mentioned a whole bunch of qualities that sound like maybe he shed that Patriots identity, that hard-ass mentality, that kind of, this is the way we're doing it, and, being very strict in what we do. Is it fair to say that he doesn't really have that quote-unquote Patriot stink anymore?
I think so. I don't. It's interesting. He comes from that background, and he's, certainly spent a lot of time there, respects Bill Belichick, has a good relationship with him. I don't always think of him in that light as a Patriots guy necessarily, but it's still a part of him. I mean, he was there a long time. It doesn't have to be a bad part of him. There are good things to be learned. I know not a lot of guys become, great head coaches after coming through there or being the coordinators, but I also don't think he was ever anointed there as, this next great thing. Like a lot of the guys were, whether it's Matt Patricia, Josh McDaniels, whoever else, he didn't necessarily ever get tagged in that way and never progressed to being a coordinator there.
Right.
So he did expose himself to some other, coaching trees, and some time with Nick Saban, which is, also kind of a Belichick, pretty similar in some ways. It's interesting because I don't know. I've wondered this about Brian Daboll over the last few years, because his name pops up, and certainly this year his name pops up as a head coaching candidate. And I always think to myself, like, would he be a good head coach? And I think it's really hard to tell how a guy's going to behave, and how a guy's going to handle being a head coach until he's in the seat. We see Brian Daboll weekly in these news conferences. Used to, see him a lot after practice and stuff like that when we were able to be at the facility more. And he's a good guy. He's personable. He gets along with his players. He's, a guy that is real friendly at times with the media. He's not overly colorful in his news conferences, but he's pretty good. But I'm always weary of coordinators, because it's like, why, is the friendliness for an end goal? Is it, that's the way it always felt with Greg Roman when he was here. Like, he's being, Mr. Nice Guy, but if he ever gets in the head chair, he's too much of a control freak to, and that is Greg Roman to a T. But I don't know with Brian Daboll. Like, I think he's a really, really good offensive coordinator. I think he's grown a ton as a coach. He's reflected a lot, improved in a lot of areas that he needed to improve on. And I don't know. I think somebody would have to be. I don't know if I'm qualified to sit here and say whether he would be a good head coach. It would take somebody sitting down with him through that interview process, seeing his binder full of notes, and getting that feel for him. Like, behind closed doors, because what we see in the media is a little bit different. And I don't think he's the control freak type necessarily. I don't think it would be a Matt Patricia situation, but like I said, that chair can do a lot of things to people. And it's sometimes really tough to tell what it'll do to somebody until they're actually sitting in it.
Fair enough. All right, we're going to take our first break. When we come back, we are going to have questions from our listeners. So if you're watching live on YouTube or Twitch, make sure to send some questions in right now, and we will come back with more profiling on, I almost messed up his name, Brian Daboll, when we come back. All right.
I want to mess it up all the time, too, because I watched too much Deep Space Nine as a kid, and I just want to keep saying Dabul, like Dabo. The gambling, the Frankies.
Yes, Twitch Sports.
The
Twitch Sports was in the chat. This is live.
The Twitch Sports.
I don't know if you're still hanging around, but yes, we are live. Thanks for stopping by the way, and the follow.
You are looking live.
We got Jack from the UK here. Oh God, you don't have any questions? You're just here to have a good time. That's fine too. We got a couple from Twitter.
They're just here so they don't get fined, Jeremy.
Uncle Indigo
That's
says
all we
that's
ask
so true.
of all of our people. You just show up and we won't find you.
Coaches say work with what they have, but then they don't. Yeah, that's 100%. And that's what we were fed from Matt Patricia, especially on defense. Just like, oh, yeah, we're going to change our game plan every week and work to our players' strength. And then, yeah, it just never happened. He wanted a very specific kind of guy, and they were never any good. Been focused on so many other candidates. Brian Daboll never crossed your mind. Fair enough. Yeah, he's kind of been underrated. Like,
I was gonna say, no one was really talking about him. I know I had him on my list cast for the top 3 for the job.
Yeah,
but everyone kind of just brushed past it. But then that the Monday night game,
that
Buffalo and 49ers, suddenly everyone's talking about Dabel now.
Yeah,
suddenly everyone was like, "Oh, Dabel, he defeated Salah. Salah's the bust. Must get Dabel. Get Dabel, not Salah. Salah will fail. His defense lost."
Well, it did have that certain feeling that it was a lot like the Super Bowl, the Patriots-Eagles Super Bowl. Like, we all knew Patricia was coming, so we were all watching that game really closely, and then the Eagles just tore them apart, and you're like, oh, God. Like,
well, I think,
it's not fair to judge
a
coach. It's not fair to judge a coach on one performance like that, especially when Josh Allen was just dealing that night. But at the same time, it's just so disheartening to see that happen.
Let's be fair, too. For most Lions fans, I don't think there's a lot of either 49ers or Buffalo game or Bills games that they are watching, a combination of one of the other. So I think both were kind of unknown quantities to them. And I think the popular general consensus of the Bills is that it's either a defensive team or it's a run the dang ball team, or some people just don't think they're good, even though they're just going to lock up the freaking NFC East here soon enough. So, I mean, but like people, it's like watching people slowly come to terms with like the Cleveland Browns. Like, oh, hey, yeah, the Cleveland Browns are really good. Oh, hey, yeah, Buffalo's really good. They're winning games. Like people need time to adjust to their strange new worlds.
All right. I think we'll get back into this. I know you got a podcast that you're going to do a little bit later, Matthew, so I want to make sure we get you out of here. You ready, Chris?
I got to get back to Cyberpunk. Let's go.
Okay, we get it. You like Cyberpunk.
Chris is a DS9 fan. You may be a good dude after all. I think it's been well documented on the POD cast how much of a Deep Space Nine Star Trek fan I am. But yeah, let's get back to it.
All right. And we are back on First Bite, our off-season preview podcast, where we're talking with Matthew Fairburn, sorry about that, the Bills beat writer for The Athletic. We're talking about a Lions head coaching candidate, the offensive coordinator of the Bills, Brian Daboll. We're going to take your guys' questions now, and let's start from our Twitch chat. A good one here. Let's talk about maybe some of the guys that Daboll would be able to potentially bring in. We got a question about general manager. That might be a little bit tough for you to answer, but if you have an answer for maybe a general manager that he'd kind of work well with, or any coaching staff, obviously if he's on the offensive guy, he's going to need a defensive-minded coach to help him out. So in terms of his connections in the past, is there anyone that he's particularly close with that might be available to bring over to Detroit?
I think the Buffalo Bills front office is going to be one that people try to poach from here pretty soon. And Joe Shane is the assistant general manager. And like I mentioned, not only does Brandon Beane seemingly get a shout out every week in Brian Daboll's news conferences, so does Joe Shane. It's always Brandon and Joe do a great job. Brandon and Joe this, Brandon and Joe that. I think Joe Shane will be a general manager here pretty soon. He was heavily involved in scouting Josh Allen, and I think he's a logical guy. Dan Morgan, their director of player personnel, that guy has GM written all over him. I think he'd be great at it. He started scouting with the Seahawks and moved over to the Bills after playing for years for the Panthers. So there's the two names there. And, this idea of what Brian Daboll's coaching staff would look like is an interesting question because he's been so many places.
Yeah.
And he didn't really hire this offensive staff. And he wasn't here at the start of when it was all getting built. So I doubt he'd be able to pry, a guy like Ken Dorsey, because Ken Dorsey might be the guy that takes his job. It's possible. Maybe he could beat him to the punch and say, you want to come be my offensive coordinator? But that might be hard. Defensively, I don't know. I think you'd probably look at the Belichick tree somewhere.
Just bring Matt Patricia right back.
Right? Like there'd probably be some of that potentially. Maybe he could lure like a Romeo Crennel, who he's worked with in the past, who's actually given Brian Daboll some trouble over the years when they've played the Texans. He's a little bit older, but I don't know. That is it's a really good question. And, I'd just be kind of throwing out names and guessing a little bit. But it's also a question that you need to think about because, like I mentioned, Sean McDermott had his third or fourth pick at offensive coordinator. Like he had a hard time building a staff. It ended up working out okay in the long run. But it's something you have to think about. What's the guy's reputation around the league? What type of candidate is he going to be able to lure into working with him? And that staff you build is pretty important. So I would guess that he would lean into the Belichick defensive tree only because it seems like that tree gives him a hell of a hard time when he's up against it. He's had trouble against Belichick. He's had trouble against Crennel. So I think that would probably be likely. I can't think of anybody on the Bills defensive staff right now that deserves to be a defensive coordinator. Like they don't have that. They've shuffled through defensive line coaches. I mean, Eric Washington was the defensive coordinator in Carolina before he became the Bills defensive line coach. He's done just an okay job. Like they don't really have anybody, I don't think, that deserves to be that. So that's why I think he would probably have to dig a little deeper in his past. Who knows? Maybe he goes to the college ranks. I think you would see him go a little bit to the college ranks potentially, and who he surrounds himself with on offense.
That way the Lions wouldn't have to change their personnel that much on defense. They got all these Patriots guys already.
Don't. All right. Let's see here. I've got a question. Excuse me. I've got a question here. You want to do this? I'll do this one from. I feel like we've got some of Simon's question out of the way. We'll revisit it. I'll let you decide on that, Jeremy. But I'll take the question from Loaded Aries, which I know we kind of touched on it before, but just kind of as a quick re-up for the question. This is from Loaded Aries. What is a quality / attribute of Dabel that makes him worthy as a head coach? And what's one attribute maybe that he probably needs to work on?
I think the flexibility is one we've touched on, but I'd also, give him props for his play calling. When everybody's looking for a coach these days, it seems like everybody wants a good offensive mind and a good, play caller, a guy that can, call the shots. And I do think Brian Daboll's gotten a lot better in that area. And I think that's something that, would, help him transition pretty smoothly to a team that, like the Lions, that has weapons on offense. He would, I'm sure, make them a pretty good offense right away. Something he needs to work on, I don't know. I think there's an element of like when you're in that, like I said, when you get in that chair and you're a head coach for the first time, there is a CEO quality to it, a, big picture leader. And I think that's something every head coach, like, he's never been a head coach. Some guys like have done it in college before they get to the NFL or whatever. Being that type of big picture leader, I think would be a transition, as it would for most, and everything that comes along with that, being the public face, daily, not just weekly. Like, Matt Patricia's a pretty good example, right, of a guy that was sort of this media darling in New England, had all these glowing profiles written of him because he was just that quirky defensive coordinator with the pencil behind his ear, and he had a big beard, and then he gets in Detroit and he's yelling at dudes to sit up straight, and he's like just being a complete a-hole. And it's like, that doesn't,
kind of like the old story about Nick Saban, the apocryphal story about Nick Saban when he gets to Miami and tells someone to tie their shoes. Yeah.
right, like, you have to earn that, I guess. It's not that you can't be a jerk to the media, or like be a grumpy presence, public facing, and still be a good coach. It's possible. But you have to earn it a little bit. You have to play the game a little bit, I think. And it makes people wear out quickly. I think, like, Matt Patricia is a really good example. Like, you have to strike the right balance. And I think Brian Daboll is in a much better spot than Patricia was, because, like I mentioned, he's had some failures in his past that forced him to change how he is and to grow. And I think he would just have to remember that when he got in that head chair, to say, all right, I don't have to be Bill. I don't have to be Nick Saban. I just have to be Brian Daboll. And maybe that's all he needs to be a good head coach. And I think a lot of Patriots guys lose sight of that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really good point, because I think I think a lot of people, even in the Lions locker room, would say that Matt Patricia became a better coach after that year one failure here in Detroit. And Brian Daboll comes with that part of his past already there. Like, he's already learned from his mistakes, already improved, hopefully, as a person and a coach. But like you said, I think there's a lot of unknown once you get into that head coaching job. I want to talk about maybe like some personal endorsements he's got. We talked a lot about Robert Saleh last week, and when Richard Sherman says something about Robert Saleh, you pay attention. Is there someone within that Bills organization that maybe has given him a similar kind of ringing endorsement?
Yeah, I mean, pick a guy on offense. They all rave about him, which is not, it's not lip service after a certain point, right? It's like I mentioned, Cole Beasley talking about specific plays that he would bring to Dabel, and literally Beasley and Dabel that day got on the phone with June Jones, like the old offensive coordinator, or he was the head coach at SMU for a little while too, I think, and mapped out, okay, how do I run this play? What do I need to know about it? Like, and what other concepts can I run off of this? And, Beasley loves Brian Daboll. Stephon Diggs, who, I don't know, he's had some clearly, bumpy relationships with, I don't think it's all Stephon Diggs' fault, but like, there's clearly been some uneven relationships he's had with coaches in his past. He vouches for Brian Daboll. Josh Allen loves him. Josh Allen's not Richard Sherman, right? He hasn't been around as long as Richard Sherman. He doesn't really know any other offensive coordinator other than Brian Daboll, but he does vouch for him. All of these receivers, talk about his how he's fun. They like being around him. He's a funny guy. He's cracking jokes. Derek Anderson would be another one. That is a guy who's been around, seen a lot of coaches, seen two different versions of Brian Daboll. Sure. So there's a lot of guys that really like Brian, and I think you'd get the same answer from Brandon Beane and Joe Shane, the two guys running the front office.
I got a really good question from the chat here from Willie Stroker Down. He asks, does Dabel have any connections to any up-and-coming free agents that might follow him to Detroit? So maybe if there are any up-and-coming Bills free agents that might help out Detroit.
On the offensive line, John Feliciano and Darrell Williams are scheduled to be free agents. Both have been good players for the Bills. I think they'd like to have both, or at least one of them back. So that would be a start. There's a chance that the Bills would release John Brown this offseason. It's not a lock, but they could save like $8 million on the cap if they cut him. And he's been a really good player here. So those are a few from his time in Buffalo. When I think about others, unless a guy like Zay Jones really excites you, but I think he's scheduled to be a free agent after this year in Vegas, but they got rid of him here. So of the guys currently on the Bills roster, those are probably the ones that could maybe make the jump on the offensive line, and then potentially John Brown, but that's not a lock. A lot of that depends on where the salary cap lands this offseason.
Lions definitely might be in the market for wide receiver though, so that's
I've got a question. Yeah, I've got a question for myself. It's not from chat or nothing. I was kind of waiting to see if chat would do it. I guess my question as far as Dabel would be is, there's going to be a lot of teams looking for coaches coming up this season. What do you kind of see besides the Lions? What could potentially be the market? Is there other places where he might have connections that might draw him to any kind of openings? Like, say, I don't know, they're not open yet, like the Jets or the Bears. Yes, they're probably going to fire Nagy. Chat. Like I see you there. I see you hooting and hollering. Or it could be places that are already open, like say Houston. Like, is there any kind of place that would have those ties that could maybe draw him in?
Houston jumps to mind first. I was thinking about it today, reading that Sports Illustrated story on Jack Easterby. They worked together in Kansas City. Brian Daboll, I think, helped bridge the connection to New England. And so they're pretty close with one another, it seems. So that's definitely one that I'm guessing he'll be on their list and he'll get an interview. And I mean, at that point, it becomes how do you rank the head coaching openings, right? Like, I think Detroit is probably a better situation in some ways, but Deshaun Watson might be the trump card. So that's one. I think that one makes the most sense as far as like actual connections to Dabel and his tree. I'm guessing the Jaguars opening will pop up at some point. And so much of this will depend on, and I think this is where some of that will come into play. Like the Jaguars will have coach and GM openings. The Lions have a coach and GM opening. So there's a potential to like come as a package deal, whether it's with, Joe Shane or Dan Morgan, like I mentioned, or somebody from, Dable's past elsewhere. So that potential creates, some, openings that he might have some more connections to. But of the ones that are open at the moment, Houston is the one that, sent some alarms off in my head. I think the Jets should be interested because they'll have a number one pick at quarterback, and they've seen what he can do in the division very closely over these last few years. So, that would be one that makes some sense. But Houston, he's definitely got the most ties to.
All right, let's wrap up this show. Thanks again, for Matthew for joining us. Let me give you an opportunity to plug your stuff here. Where can people find you if there's any more information on Brian Daboll that maybe you've written about, or I know you have some colleagues over there at The Athletic that cover the Bills as well. Let's hear it.
Yeah, I've written some stuff over at The Athletic. If you go to, I don't know, if you search my name in The Athletic and scroll down the page, you'll find some stories that I've done back to Josh Allen's rookie year might interest people. Some stuff on the concepts he was running and how he was developing Josh Allen. And there's some stuff from recently on, lessons from Allen's rookie year from when I talked to Derek Anderson. That was just a few weeks ago. And Dabel was heavily involved in that as well. And I did a story that I tweeted out today. This was from a few years ago, inside their scouting of Josh Allen. If people want an idea of what role Dabel had in that and what he had to say about that whole process, you can find that on my Twitter page, which is just at Matthew Fairburn, as it's spelled right here.
All right. That's at MattheWFAIRBURN. Thank you all for listening. We are going to be back here Sunday night, after the late Lions game between the Lions and the Packers up here on our Twitch page and our YouTube page, and then obviously over on our podcast platform the next morning. So until then, it's chaos. Be kind. All right. We're still technically live, but the recorder's off. Matthew, you're free to go if you got to go. Thanks again for joining us. That was really great information.
Matt, thank you very much. You got a poggers from the chat.
You did get a poggers.
That is important to note.
What is that?
It's Twitch chat
Never
for
mind.
awesome, I guess.
No,
I don't know.
no.
I couldn't
Don't
even tell you.
explain it. You got it.
I'll have
You
to
let
go-
the thing be.
Twitch is weird. Don't go down that rabbit hole of Twitch. It's weird. Not that I hate you guys,
Sorry.
Twitch. You guys
get
are
to be a
probably
pog champ. You get to be a little pog champ. That's all that matters.
I dig it. Appreciate you having me, guys.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. All right, we can stick around maybe for a little bit. I know you've got something very important to do. I don't know if you've mentioned it yet.
Yeah, no, I was streaming a little bit of it last night, but we started dropping frames, so I stopped. So.
But yeah, chat. So while I'm here, if you guys have any suggestions of who you want us to talk about next week, feel free to throw them in the chat now. I can get working on a good insider. I think we've gotten a couple of great guests so far with extremely good insight on both these guys. If you guys want to do Bieniemy next, I know he's obviously a popular name that has, some of the shine has been rubbed off there as well since people started to figure out who he actually is. But if you guys have any other candidates, or if you want us to jump into some general manager candidates, feel free to.
I'm not allowed to submit one.
No, we're not. We're not doing Kiffin. That's definitely not. Arthur Smith is a must. Yeah,
SC Ghost is saying.
Yeah, he's your burner. I know that.
No, it's not.
I think I'd like to get Greg Doyle if I could.
Why would I pay for Twitch Prime on a burner, or subscribe on a burner?
Adam Gase. See, okay, now he's saying Adam
Adam
Gase.
Gase.
Okay, so now we're not getting serious responses here. No Lane Kiffin. Okay, so Arthur Smith will be top on our list. Greg Doyle would be kind of the best guy, I think, to get. He's been covering the Colts forever for the Indy Star.
Doyle.
Joe Brady.
Doyle.
Matt what?
See, I got questions. I got questions about Brady in that he's just so damn young. He has no
Sure.
NFL connections. Someone was
Yeah.
I mean, what? He spent a year as an offensive assistant for the Saints.
Couple years,
I
yeah.
don't think that's
You'd have to imagine he'd probably pull guys from the Saints if he could.
Yeah.
What's up? Miss anything? Not really. I mean, we're just closing up here, so you actually. You did, yeah. You missed
You
everything.
did miss everything.
You missed everything. You missed our guest.
Literally everything.
We just had. I'm so bad with names. We just had Matthew Fairburn from The Athletic talk about Brian Daboll, as you can see from our title here. He talked to him basically about everything. I learned a ton about him. And I think, do you have overall let's kind of close this off with now how our opinions have changed on Brian Daboll since that interview. What are your thoughts on him?
Daboll is a man. He is mortal like everything else. My opinion has not changed. I mean, I was the one who put him on my list to begin with, and that was again before anyone was really kind of talking about Dabel,
right?
That I saw in Lions Twitter. I think I didn't know he was that much of a hard ass in the past. That does throw up a bit of a flag, but I mean, at the end of the day, we're along for the ride. My opinion literally does not matter on whether or not this guy, unless he's actually got real, legitimate, scary dirt in his past. We're throwing spit at a wind and wondering what's the best fit for, honestly, a cipher at this point. I do like the offense. I love what's happened with Josh Allen. I think that'll be important for whatever quarterback comes next, and there will be a quarterback after Stafford. Sooner, not later. So I think that is important. I guess your question is that are you committing to him as your rebuild coach and then beyond? I think that would be the important call to make. There. I think, again, I just keep going back to Josh Allen. I think that's the big strunken positive here is what's worked with Josh Allen. And the negatives, obviously, that he's just taken a lot of jobs with bad teams. I mean, some of that's outside of his control, but that's also I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
Didn't work out there.
the sense I got is just like if you're a Lions fan desperate for an offensive minded coach that's cutting edge, that can build from the ground up, that can play to your team's strength, that isn't hold into one strategy, whether it's, establish the run or whatever, he's a great candidate. I think he's in a perfect spot right now as an offensive coordinator. I think that's the Bills are lucky to have him, and there are all those questions about his leadership abilities and him being a head coach. But I think my biggest concern that I got out of this interview was, what the fuck are the Lions going to do on defense? Because if that's what his plan is, to go back to the Patriots tree for the defense, interview over, get out of here, get out of the building.
We're good. We're absolutely 100% good. I think one of the problems is that as we look at more coaches, it's just going to keep coming back to the Patriots sometimes, because these coaching trees have become utterly incestuous at this point.
True.
There's literally it's basically Reed and Belichick at this point. Yeah. Maybe you dig back far enough and you're hitting the Billick tree or the who's the other one I'm trying to think of? Because everyone always compares Billick to this guy, and I always forget his name. He's on the CBS crew. I don't remember.
Tomlin?
No, that's the thing. Tomlin, those Steelers guys, they don't really go a lot of places.
True.
They all kind of stick close to the nest. Parcells, yes, thank you. Parcells had a big coaching tree, which I think Belichick's part of.
Kind of, yeah.
But yeah. But those are basically, we just named 3, maybe 4 trees. That's it.
Yeah.
That's your entire. At some point, these guys just keep coming back around again. The same guys over and over. So unless you are plucking defensive minds from college, then you are going to eventually get a guy who has spent time with the Patriots. And even Daboll here. I think of Daboll as the farthest thing from a Patriot way kind of guy, but he still has Patriots in his past.
Even Nick Saban. I feel like Nick Saban's a Patriots guy. He is.
Well, yes, in the sense that, here's the thing is he's not straight Patriots guy, because I don't lump him as a Patriots guy because he didn't come from under Belichick. It's more like Saban and Belichick worked together in Cleveland.
Yeah.
That was their genesis, was forming everything they needed in Cleveland, and they just went separate ways. Belichick stuck to the pro circuits, and Saban wanted to go to college, coach at Toledo, coached at Michigan State, took a bite at took the LSU job, then took a swing at the NFL, and clearly didn't work, but immediately scampered back down to Alabama. And it's not that it didn't work because of scheme or anything. It's just, again, Saban didn't know how to handle at the time a professional locker room.
Right.
He didn't understand that all those guys have more power and agency than a college kid at Toledo or Michigan State. So,
a couple notes from chat real quick. Super Squares tonight. Yes, I will be on there. I will be on the Super Squares Twitch channel tonight, breaking down Rams Patriots, I think it is tonight.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Ed Dodds. We could maybe talk a little Ed Dodds on here next time. Echo Insurgency, I should say, says, any talk or rumors of power restructure within the Lions organization? Curious how that might help or hurt their GM search. The only real news we've gotten is that Mike Disner, their cap guy, apparently, according to Dave Burkett, is expected to play a big part in their GM search, which is interesting. Disner's got an extensive history in the NFL, does also have a little bit of Patriots history as well, which is why he was brought in last year as their cap guy, cap and contract guy. It puts me a little bit at ease knowing that it's not just Sheila and Rod pulling the strings there.
On the other hand, I really can't say too many nice things about the cap situation for the Lions. It's not cap hell or nothing.
It's a lot better than it was under Martin Mayhew.
No. Yeah. No, that's for sure. And I think they structured Stafford's contract just right. But some of we've kind of looked at some of the money these guys that Quinn went after, and I'm just like, oh, okay. I don't know if I'd do that, but
yeah. You also have to question Kenny Galladay, right? What's going on there? Was that Disner's fault? Is that Quinn's fault? Is that Patricia's fault?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah, and at the end of the day, too, like, you're gonna pay a tax if you're Detroit at this point.
True.
Just it's your reputation.
Loaded areas.
I know Lions fans hate to hear that, but
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Part of life is knowing who you are.
Loaded areas. Are you guys buying stock on Josh Allen? I mean, I think at this point it's probably too costly for me. But yeah, I think he's great.
If you are one of these draft Twitter guys still manning the pillbox against Josh Allen, you are that guy, that Japanese soldier from World War II fighting on that lone Pacific island alone at this point. Like, give it a rest. You just hate the guy, and you're cherry picking everything you want because you want to see him fail. He's having a phenomenal bleeping season at this point. Like, imagine turn that around for you. Because I know there's a couple guys in that draft Twitter who are also Lions fans. You're doing exactly what Stafford haters are doing to Josh Allen. So cut it the bleep out. All right. Like, no. I mean it. Like, it's just obscene watching these people trip over themselves to say why Josh Allen is a fraud. Like, this isn't a Carson Wentz situation. Like, he's shown progress every damn year, man. Like,
why
I don't know what else
suddenly
he's
turn
do.
into the leave Brittany alone guy. Like,
no, but I
why are you so defensive
every time
of
the
him?
Bills, I just maybe because that was the last Monday Night Football game I was watching was that, and seeing people still just trying to pull out excuses on why Josh Allen is a bust, even though he's at this point not a bust. He's a serviceman in the NFL. Like,
I mean, the Bills are 9-3, y'all. It's real.
Yeah,
they're real.
Yeah, it's real. It's happening, and they're not doing that on the back of Frank Gore.
No, sadly not. Couple people mentioning Spielman. I don't think Spielman should be taken seriously, whether he's on TV or whether people are advocating for him.
Guys, did you guys learn nothing from the name that cannot be spoken? Have you learned nothing from taking guys from television, linebackers from television?
By the way, I don't know. First of all, I don't know if TJ is being legitimate or joking around. But I'm going to show a tweet from TJ Lang that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen.
Oh, my God. I know what you're talking about.
It's his picks for the Lions coaching staff. And I don't know if you can read that or not, but he says, quarterbacks coach Dan Orlovsky, wide receivers coach Herman Moore, running backs coach Barry Sanders, defensive line coach Haloti Ngata, linebacker coach Chris Spielman, and then he makes his prediction for head coaches Saleh,
this tweet,
Dan Quinn, Darrell Bevel retaining his
I never want to see former players complain about other people in the media not playing the game of football and not as like a bona fides to say, oh, we know more than you because we are former players. This list is just straight star fucking. I'll just say it. It's star fucking. It's friend fucking. It's literally, I know these guys. I like these guys. They are my friend. And I want to do nepotism. I want to do fucking nepotism. None of these guys, like, this is not a serious list. This is not.
I do think he's joking. I mean, he can't.
I would
really
hope
be
he's joking.
But at the same time, it's TJ Lang. We have no idea.
But how many times has Dan Orlovsky gone on television and literally his only criteria on whether or not he thinks someone's good is basically he's my friend.
Yeah. Well, here's the interesting thing.
Former players are so goddamn nepotistic, man. They look out for their own cult and nothing else. They don't give a fuck. You could fail at a million places, but as long as you are from that cult of NFL players, they will defend you. And like, so whenever they say fans don't know what they're talking about, or, oh, these people in the media, these people on sports talk radio, they don't know what to talk about. They've never had their hand in the dirt. Okay, that's a great comeback, but also don't come out here and say dumb shit like that. No, I'm going off because I hear this all the time working in sports talk radio.
I mean,
former players.
You're in a mood. Let's be honest. Like,
I know,
this is
but
your
I see
second rant
all the
in
time
2
get off
minutes.
on their horse. They get up on their horse and say, "You've never had your hand in the dirt." Okay, cool, but you know what? You're not interesting to listen to. We're literally giving it is full on socialism. We are just giving you a handout because you once played ball. Like, we didn't already give you several $1 million, and you're too greedy to give that chair over to someone else who actually knows what they're talking about.
Okay. let's move off this rant really quick because I also want to jump off here really quick.
Prove your worth.
Prove your worth.
It's a meritocracy.
The one thing I want to say about TJ Lang's tweet here. His probably realistic tweet where he says Saleh as the head coach, Dan Quinn is the defensive coordinator, and then retain Bevel as the offensive coordinator. Is Dan Orlovsky brings up a really good point, which I know we're all starting to sour on Dan Orlovsky, but he brings up a good point. And if you listen to our podcast last week, he says Saleh bringing LaFleur's little brother wherever he goes, in my opinion, would be a massive selling point for me. That's exactly what Mike Mayoko said on the podcast. He said the LaFleurs they went to Robert Saleh's wedding. So Mike LaFleur, the pass game coordinator in San Francisco, would almost certainly come with him as the offensive coordinator if they can bring him. Because last time when Matt LaFleur tried to bring his brother over to Green Bay, the 49ers said, no, you can't touch him. Anyways, I think we're probably going to.
These guys are going to bring baggage with them. They just, that's not all baggage is bad.
Sure. All right, I think that's going to do it, guys. We will be back here on Twitch and YouTube Saturday morning to do our normal Madden Sim and then podcast. We're probably not going to do a post-game show. We'll probably just do a full-on podcast around 8, 9-ish. We'll probably have to play it by ear because the Lions are in that 4:30 spot or 4:15, 4:30, whatever it is. You want some cameos before we go? Okay, we'll get some cameos before we go. Zazu, you were bothering me the whole first 10 minutes of the podcast. Now you're just going to lay in your ball.
Sorry, I'm trying to show Ruby in the background. He's there. I'm not going to pick him up. He's comfy.
Come here. You interrupted me.
Here. You know what?
You're getting interrupted now. Ugh!
You want some? Oh, here he comes.
You think we can still possibly make the playoffs, says Gabe? No. Not at all. No chance.
It's fun. It's fun to believe, though.
It is fun to believe. If they win against the Packers, I'm still not going to believe, but you know what? I'm going to have a heck of a time. I'm going to enjoy beating the Packers. In there, right, puppers. I think I saw on 538 they have like the Lions playoff chances at like 3%. If they beat the Packers, it bumps up to 10. This many percent. Awesome. That's about it. Pets of Detroit. Is this how we should just end every Twitch stream? Is just
I don't want to pick up Ruby every time. Ruby will get mad. Ooh. I don't want to. Ruby likes to sleep most of the day, as you can tell. I'm a big guy.
Stop licking.
You see the other treat. You see treat number 3. Here.
Oh,
I can't pull it. Okay.
All right.
Ruby. Oh.
I think we're going to end it there, guys. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for all the follows. Combat Sack, thank you for the subscription on YouTube. Twitch Sports, if you're still here, thank you for the follow. Hopefully you come around again. Nice to see you here. And Ranug, thank you for the follow. Oh, and Nick, I almost forgot to say thank you for the 100 bits, Nick. I will not read your message. Everyone in chat saw it. All right. We'll see you guys on Saturday. Thanks for joining us. Goodbye.